All right. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. This is one of two live sessions that we host each month inside the Kidlit Academy. And we're super excited today because Pat Zietlow Miller is joining us. Hi, Pat. Welcome.
Hi.
Hi, we're so excited to have you. This is a life workshop, and it's going to be all about when less is more. So, we're going to learn how to cut the fluff and find out what we really want to say in our stories. And while Pat is walking us through the content, if we could all just stay muted so we have a clean recording in the end, it's going to be added to your guys' course portal. But if you do have any questions, please go ahead and put them in the chat. We do have time for some Q&A at the very end. All right, Pat, are you ready?
I am ready.
Great.
Let's see. Okay, so can people see my screen?
Yes, perfect.
Um, okay, so I'm Pat Zietlow Miller, and I live in Madison, Wisconsin, and I write picture books. I've got 22 picture books out in the world right now. I've got more on their way. Um, Highlights are one of my picture books, Be Kind, was on the New York Times list for 10 weeks. And another one of my picture books, In Our Garden, is part of the Dolly Parton Imagination Library, which is kind of like a lifelong dream. And I like to think that Dolly sat down and read my book. I'm not sure if that's true, but I like to think it. I also worked for 25 years as a corporate communicator at two Fortune 500 insurance companies and as a newspaper reporter. So, one of the hills that I like to die on, or the soapbox I like to stand on, is that it's really possible and really important to say or write things in a very clear and concise way. And the more you can do that, the better anything you create is going to be, whether it's a picture book, whether it's an email, whether it's a cover letter, anything. And I do think that while it's a fairly easy skill to master, it's something that a lot of people haven't thought about or haven't been taught. And so today I'm going to hopefully tell you how to do it a little better than you currently do, because with any message that or story that you share, you're halfway to success if you can be short, simple, and clear. It helps you, it helps your eventual reader. It just makes life better all the way around. Um, Part of the reason it's important is because everybody's short on time and bombarded with too much information. And while they might have the best of intentions, if what they get from you or anybody is wordy and long or confusing, or even when they pick it up and look at it, it looks inaccessible, they're much more likely to set it down, move on, think, I'll look at that later, and then they don't. Simple writing is easier to read, it flows better, it's more accessible, and people remember it more than if your point is kind of lost in a sea of words. There's actually research that shows people read more of shorter documents than longer ones, and they understand more of what they read. And that's true whether it's, like I said, a story or a memo or whatever it is that you're writing. I know when my kids were little, there were some picture books that I would kind of hide because, at bedtime, I just thought they were too long and I wanted to like get on with it. Um, Also, people usually only remember 3 or 4 points from something they read or hear. So you want to make sure that those 3 or 4 points are very clear and obvious and not lost in whatever it is you're creating. For those people who cook, I think writing well is like using a bouillon cube. You want to pack a lot of flavor, power, and pizzazz into a very small package. So that's kind of how I look at when I'm creating something. I want to like narrow it down to the essence of what it is I'm trying to say while still having a lot of flavor. Um, so when it comes to picture books, one of the questions I get a lot, and if you look online, there's lots of opinions floating around about it, is how long should my story be? And then people say, oh, well, under 1,000 words, under 750 words, under 600 words. Oh, no, it should be like 500 or less. And I think it's kind of a trick question. There isn't like one magic number that once you hit that number, you've got it done. Asking how long a story should be is kind of like asking how big a dog should be, because it kind of depends on the dog, right? A Chihuahua should just naturally be a lot smaller than whatever kind of dog that is there, which I should know, but I don't. You know, it depends on the dog. Like if a Chihuahua was as big as the other dog, it would be massively overweight. If the other dog was as small as the Chihuahua, it would need to eat more. So it kind of depends, what is your story, and is it as lean and mean and tight as it possibly can be for the type of story that it is. You're not aiming for a particular word count. You want the right words. And that's what I'm going to walk you through today, is how to hopefully get those right words without losing all the things that make your story valuable and wonderful. Kevin Henkes is like one of my picture book writing idols, and he also lives in Madison, which is where I live. I've met him, I don't know him, but I heard this wonderful story about how he started his picture book career. And we're not Kevin Henkes, so we can't really follow in his footsteps. But when he was 19, like a sophomore in college at the University of Wisconsin, he went to New York. And this was back at the time when you could actually, make an appointment or walk in and show somebody your work. And so he went to Candlewick and he walked in as a 19-year-old and showed them a dummy for his first picture book, which ended up being All Alone. And they basically signed him on the spot, which, never happens, but he's Kevin Henkes. And this is what, I'm sorry, it was Greenwillow, not Candlewick, I misspoke. And this is what his Greenwillow editor, Susan Hirschman, said about All Alone. It had a beginning, it had a middle, it had an end. The pacing was superb. There wasn't an extra word in it. And I read that and I was like, okay, that is my goal for everything that I write. And for a while, I printed this out and I kind of taped it to the side of my computer. It had a beginning, it had a middle, it had an end. The pacing was superb. There wasn't an extra word in it. And so I just think that's such a great goal for picture books. When I worked in corporate America, I had a good career, but I always felt like I didn't really fit in because my heart was really with picture books. But I was an editor. And so I had a quote at the end of my email that whenever I sent an email, and it was Richard Peck from a Newbery Medal winner. And the insurance company I worked with, nobody knew what the Newbery Medal was. But he said, you can cut 20 words from the tightest page you ever wrote. And it's amazing how many insurance executives would talk to me about that quote. So I felt like I was doing my little part to make insurance less wordy. So one of the common misconceptions when I'm editing something or critiquing something that someone else has written, I look at it and I think, well, this could be tighter, this could be shorter. And people's reaction is, well, but if I make it shorter, if I make it tighter, I'm going to lose my plot. I'm going to lose my voice. I'm going to lose my humor. I'm going to lose all the things that give my story personality and make it mine. And you will not if you do it properly. Because I'm not talking about when I say this could be, you could tell the same story in 200 fewer words. I'm not saying, go to the end of your story and hack the last 200 words. You want to go through the story and like almost artistically cut words. And I'm going to talk about that. You want to say the same thing you're saying now in a shorter, clearer way. And I love this example. This is from Monica Acker, who's the author of Brave Like Mom, a picture book. And she posted this on social media and I loved it. And I said, can I please use this? And she said, yes. So thank you, Monica. She said, every Saturday I order a burger for one of my kids. And she says, please, no lettuce, tomato, pickles, onion, ketchup, mustard, or mayo. And then one day her husband leaned over her shoulder and says, I just say only cheese. And then she said, he just saved me 8 words. And I just thought that was such a lovely example. And it's a great example of what I'm talking about. You're saying the exact same thing, but with a lot fewer words. Okay, so I have a couple corporate examples and a lot of picture book examples. But corporate writing is like, just notorious for being overly wordy. So you write a sentence that says, our company is planning to increase its staff by 10%. It's 11 words. You could say it in 8 if you say we plan to increase staff by 10%, or just will increase staff by 10%, 6 words. So same thing told in a different number of words. Here's one of my favorite picture book examples. I made this initial one up. It's nobody's story that they submitted to me, but it's very indicative of what I often see. When Felicity's mom asked her what she wanted most of all, she knew just what to say. Felicity wanted a cat. She wanted a cat more than she wanted a bicycle, light up sneakers, a piece of Aunt Edna's famous blueberry pie, or even her very own room. Felicity wanted to have a cat more than anything. Now, that's not horrible writing. No one's going to put you in bad picture book jail if you wrote something like that, but it's 56 words. And it doesn't really read like a picture book. And so you can say the same thing if you wrote it like this. Felicity wanted a cat more than a bicycle, light up sneakers, and Edna's blueberry pie, or her very own room, more than anything. It's 22 words. It looks more like a picture book with the short sentences, and it says the exact same thing. The only thing that's not in the second example is we don't mention her mom. And if the mom is really important, she can show up later in the story. But this really works. And if you have a manuscript that, has longer lines and you think might be wordy, you know, print it out, set it down, go through and say, could I make it look more like this? Just give it a try and see what comes up with. Because, we save that many words just from the first couple paragraphs. Think how many words you could save if you went through the whole manuscript. Some people think, picture books are easy because they're short. Well, how long could that have taken? But shorter isn't easier, because if it was easy, we'd have our first drafts looking that short and clean. You have to take out the right words in the right way, and then you have to arrange the ones you have left like flowers in a vase. It's an art. And so I'm going to share 10 tips to help you do it. And what I would suggest is, if you've got something that you think, wow, I think this could be shorter, I would go through it 10 separate times, each time looking for one of the tips. And then when you're done, look at it and like see where you started and where you ended up. And obviously, you can save your first draft as it is. So if you decide, nope, I liked it better the way it was, you still got it, but save it under a different name, go through it 10 times, once for each of the 10 tips, and see how many words you can change. And here's my one disclaimer, because someone always asks me, as I go through these 10 tips, there will likely be times when you're looking at your story, when you hit one of these tips and you're like, wow, I could say this shorter, I could take this out, but I really think in this particular instance, I need that extra word. And sometimes you do. That's why it's an art. So, you don't have to follow it slavishly, and do absolutely every word. Sometimes you need a word for a beat, or you need it for another reason in your story. And then it's perfectly fine to say, I'm going to intentionally choose to leave that word in. But it's more about asking yourself the question and seeing, do I really need it? Okay, so tip number one is you don't need backstory. And this works for corporate communications and it works for picture books. So here's my corporate example. You want to start with the main message, not the history. So many times in insurance, I would get memos that started like, you may remember that a process improvement team formed 3 years ago to evaluate how incoming customer calls should be assigned to our customer service staff. Well, first of all, that's awful, because if you don't remember that, you're going to be like, nope, I don't remember it. And you're going to move to the next email and stop reading. So what you want to do is start with, what do people really need to know? Instead of all the backstory about how it happened, you want to say, what's changed now? Customer service staff now will be assigned calls that match their experience, workload, and location. Here's how it will work. And then you go into the details. And then if you really need to at the end, you can say, our process improvement team suggested this change. Okay. Picture books. I see a lot of people doing something like this. Sally was a friendly girl who lived in a little red house at the end of a very small street with a goldfish named Emily and a mother and father who loved her very much. One day, again, this is not horrible writing, but it's all backstory. You want to start right in the middle. What happened one day? And so this is a picture book, Stokes, the brief career of NBA's first Black superstar. And this is the first line of the picture book. In the last game of the 1957-58 NBA regular season, Maurice Stokes soared and ripped down a rebound. You're right in the middle of the story. It doesn't say, Maurice Stokes was born wherever he was born, and he always loved basketball. And you're right in the middle of a game that was very important. And then, as the book progresses, you learn a little bit more about the backstory. Number two, you want to remove words that you use too often. Every writer has words that I call kind of like, emotional support words. You work them into your copy and you don't even know you're using them, and suddenly they're everywhere. That both, just, however, very, suddenly is one of my emotional support words. Currently, then, now, you can take them out. You can do this a couple ways. You can just go through your manuscript and look for them. Or if you're really not sure what your overused words might be, there are these things called word cloud generators. And the companies that produce them change all the time, so I don't want to recommend a specific one, but if you Google word cloud generator or word tag generator, websites will come up and you can copy and paste your story into a box. You hit a button, and then it makes a word cloud. And the words that you use most often in your story are bigger. So this is from a picture book I read. The main character's name, or I wrote, the main character's name is Elsie. So that's obviously the biggest word. Um, and then the smaller words are used less often. So you can go through and look. And if the word is vital to your story, well, yeah, it should be big. But if you've got low value words in there a lot and they pop up, you can go in and say, I don't need that anymore. And I think a good way to go through your story is like, if you use a word a lot, look at every instance and say, do I really need it? Doesn't mean you can never use it, but, try to use it once and then change it the next 2 times or delete it the next 2 times or find a different way to say it. Number 3 is looking at how you quote people. Dialogue, especially in picture books, should be like very tight and very concise. So we're going to start by talking about attribution. Who said the quote? A lot of times you don't need the he says and she says because it's very apparent from the story who's talking. So you can say, Miss McPherson slammed a ruler on her desk. If you don't stop right this instant, the class trip is canceled. You don't have to say she said or said Miss McPherson because And sometimes when people are having a conversation, you don't need it either. Calvin, it's time to come inside. Why? Because it's dark. Why? Because it's late. Why? You don't need said mom, said Calvin, said mom, said Calvin. The only time you need it in an exchange is if it goes on too long and it gets confusing about who said what. But a lot of times you don't. So look at every he said and she said and ask yourself if you need it. Corporately, this change will get our product into stores more quickly, according to Chief Operations Officer Lindsay Barrett. Quote, a faster delivery means a fresher product, which is what our customers want most, unquote. No need for a he said or a she said. And then I see this way more often than I think I should. People put attribution on both ends of their quote, according to Lindsay, and then the quote, Lindsay says. You might not need either one. And if you do, you only need one. You don't need to say according to Lindsay and then Lindsay says. You just one or the other or none. And then when you're looking at quotes outside of the attribution, you really want to say, does the quote I'm using enhance my story? Like what would happen if it wasn't there? Would the story or the memo work just as effectively? Does it sound like something a real person would actually say? And this is really important. If you can't see yourself or a kid actually saying it in a conversation with someone, it shouldn't be in your story. From a corporate perspective, people like to make themselves what they think, sound much more erudite than they really are by using a lot of corporate slogans and jargon. Nope. And in kids' books, a lot of times I see quotes that I'm wondering, has this person like hung around any actual children? Because either they sound way too adult or they sound like kind of a caricature of a kid, like they've tried so hard to be kid friendly, they've almost gone in the other direction, and it doesn't sound like an actual human child. So you want to, would someone really say it? And then does the quote add something to the story? Because, if it's just a fact, it shouldn't be in a quote. It should be clever or engaging or add some perspective that's different than what's there. Bearheart is a new book that just came out that I really like. And this is how they handle it. It's a bear that finds a lion, and the lion needs a friend and needs someone to take care of him. So the bear's trying to help the lion. And so he's going around asking other animals. And he says, do you have room in your heart for a lion? Which is just a lovely, beautiful quote. And then the response is, no room, my heart is full of stars. So there's no he said, no she said, but look at how beautiful the language is. It wasn't like, oh, I found this lion and he needs a place to stay. It's just, do you have room in your heart for a lion? No room, my heart is full of stars. Will you take this lion? I cannot help, the moon fills my whole heart. So you still have voice, you still have love, and it's very non-boring. This is Jeannie Mobley, who is a middle grade author, and this is what she had to say about using quotes. She says often her first drafts look like this. Hey, did you know Susan is dating Bob? Yes, I know, but Bob's an idiot. What does she see in him? Who knows? Maybe she likes idiot. So she takes out the beginning, the hey, the yes, I know, and the who knows, and it's cleaner. Do you know Susan is dating Bob? Bob's an idiot. What does she see in him? Maybe she likes idiots. Same thing, but with you've lost 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 words. Um, and this is Nidhi Chanani, who is a wonderful picture book and graphic novel creator. And she says, in real conversations, we stammer, fumble, and our speech is cluttered. In a book, I remove the messiness and focus on concise communication. This allows the character's speech to be highly relatable and readable. And I think that's what you want, highly relatable and readable. Um, Adverbs and adjectives. Picture books, some of the best ones have very, very few of these. Um, Corporately, you can get by without many. Like I said before, corporatos wants to make themselves sound more important. So everything is innovative, exciting, strategic, key, important, or unique. And those words add very little value, but they take up a lot of space. So I love this. Like it starts out, this exciting project will provide innovative solutions to our key customers' wants and help us achieve our unique strategic goals. If you take out all the orange words, you get this project will provide solutions our customers want and help us achieve our goals, which is really what you're saying. The rest of the stuff is just fluff. And you go from 19 words to 14 words and it's clearer. My picture book example, I call the little red wagon effect. If you're writing a picture book and there's a wagon in it, it's very tempting to always refer to it as a little red wagon because that's how a lot of people tend to think about wagons. But let's think about this for a minute. First of all, most wagons are red, so you really wouldn't have to say it's red because the art's going to show it. If it were a different color, and it had to be a different color for the purpose of the story, you could say the little green wagon the first time, but then trust that the art's going to show it, or you could just make an art note and not have that word in there at all. And even if for some reason you had to define it once, you don't have to call it that every single time. And then you're saving, a couple words every time you mention the wagon. And it doesn't just apply to wagons, obviously, it applies to like anything you're talking about. Adverbs, you want to take them out after dialogue tags or change. Instead of saying she said loudly, just say she shouted. The bright blue ball might just become the ball because, again, the art's going to show it. Now, there are times when you're purposefully using a series of terms as a refrain, or, there's a reason, then bright blue ball might be fine. But if it's just in there and you haven't intentionally chosen it for a structural result, you probably don't need the adverbs and the adjectives. Every word should justify itself. 3 books that I think are just beautifully, gorgeously written and are the epitome of spare writing without adverbs and adjectives are Starbright, If You Want to See a Whale, and The Dot. They're all beautiful. And like I've gone through some of them and counted like how many adverbs or adjectives are in the entire book. And there's very few. And the ones that are there are very consciously chosen. And they're all beautiful. And I think you should read them. What you want to do then for number 5 is go through your story line by line and look at each line as its own little individual entity and say, does this line move my story forward? If I took it out, would the story still progress in a logical, understandable way? And then after you've answered that question, you want to go, really? Like if you say yes, you want to go, really? Do I really need it? If it doesn't, take it out. You won't even remember it was there after a day or so. My first picture book, Sophie Squash, I got edits back from my editor, Ann Schwartz, and she lined out a sentence. And I really wanted to be, a good collaborator, reviser, writer. But my initial reaction was, I need that sentence. And I thought, well, okay, I'm just going to like make all the other changes and I'm going to leave that sentence in there. And so I went through and I did all the other changes. I left the sentence in there. I read the story through. And luckily I said, well, let me just see how it reads without that line. I read it without the line and I thought, damn, she's right. So I sent it back to her without the line. And now I couldn't even tell you where it was or what it said. So this is how it works. This is a story that has not sold and probably never will sell, but it's an example of how I did it. I started out saying, this is Milo. He's an optimist. If there's a sliver of sunlight, he'll find it right there behind that cloud. So I went through and looked at every line. And I realized that he's an optimist is pretty much the same thing as if there's a sliver of sunlight, he'll find it. So it became, this is Milo. If there's a sliver of sunlight, he'll find it right there behind that cloud. Much better, much shorter, 3 words saved. I'll never miss them. Okay, and this might be one of my favorite corporate examples. Everything in blue is really unnecessary. You can just say our expense and travel policy provides guidelines for business travel and expenses. By observing these guidelines, you contribute to our profitability and growth goals by helping manage expenses. All that other stuff is just fluff and you don't need it. And it takes a while to train yourself, but you really got to ask that question really. Like, really, what would be happen if I took this out? Would it really be so bad? Number 6 is passive voice. That's where the person or entity taking the action is not at the start of the sentence. So handouts will be distributed by your manager. That's passive voice. And here's my cat. Active voice puts the person or entity taking the action at the beginning. Your manager will distribute handouts. You've saved 2 words by making the voice active. Active voice reads better than passive voice. And it might not seem like much, but it adds up over the course of the story. And your high school English teacher will thank you. Now, I can't take credit for this one. I saw this online and I loved it. An easy trick to avoid the passive voice: if you can add "end by zombies" to the sentence, it's passive voice. If you can't, it's active. For example, the world was rocked by Kieran, end by zombies. That's passive voice. Active voice would be Kieran rocked the world. So you can't put "end by zombies" after that. So a simple test to save serious headaches. 7, avoiding repetition. We talked about this a little bit with the wagon example, but again, if you say something once, you don't have to say it again and again and again, unless it's a refrain and you're doing it on purpose because it makes the story better. So if you have a marketing brochure and you say it's new once, you don't have to say the new brochure every time. You can just say the brochure or even it. Sometimes you don't need repetition because readers can see what you're doing in the illustrations for a picture book. You can think, what have I told them already? So they ought to know. And you can think, what should I link to or include in back matter? And these are 3 picture books that have excellent back matter. Back matter is where you've got a picture book. It's either fiction or nonfiction, doesn't matter. And there's some information that you think the readers either should know or would be interesting if they knew, but it doesn't have to be in the body of your story. So then there's usually a page or 2 at the end of the book that has those details, like Poppy's All Souls Song is a picture book, lovely picture book about All Saints Day or All Souls Day, where you remember people who've gone before. And there's a note at the back that just explains the history of the holiday. My picture book, What Can You Do with a Rock, has 2 pages at the back that talk about all the different kinds of rocks and like what can you do if you want to start a rock collection and what are some other books you should read, but they're not in the story itself because they would just weigh it down. And so go through your story and say, like, is there anything in here that's important, but maybe doesn't fit the story plot and weighs it down? And could I make it an author's note or some back matter at the end? So you can look, there's ways to do back matter creatively and there's ways to do it less creatively. And I think these 3 books do a very nice job because you can have a lot of fun with it and make it interesting to read. It doesn't have to be dry and boring. Okay, so this is Tara Lazar, a wonderful picture book writer. And she told me about a time she was writing a draft of a picture book and her main character discovered a wonderful room. And initially she had these long descriptive sentences describing everything that was in the room. And then she realized the character could open the door, the reader could turn the page, and there could be a 2-page spread that just showed how awesome the room was. So she cut all her text and just replaced it with wow. And some of my favorite picture books do that. They have a setup, you turn the page, and there's just 2 pages of art. And then people always say, well, how will the illustrator know what to draw? And if you really have to, you can leave an illustrator's note, but a lot of times you don't have to because they're professional illustrators. They understand your story and they will come up with something cooler than maybe you ever could have thought. Number 8, and this is so important, you want to read your story out loud. You can read it to your cats, you can read it to your dogs, but just read it out loud or record yourself reading it and listen back. So are you stumbling over any of your text? Because if you wrote it and you're stumbling over it, that's a good sign. You can make that section tighter or you could remove it. And then you have to be really brave. Give it to someone who's never seen your story before and ask them to read it out loud. And where are they stumbling? And you want to make it tighter or remove, because the best picture books are books that anybody can pick up and read out loud. And they're going to do it kind of the same. And yeah, I've watched enough people read picture books out loud where it is a skill and some people are better at it than others. But you don't know who's going to be picking your book up and reading it at bedtime. So listen to someone else. Where do they stumble and how could you fix that? And then if there's a part that you're struggling with, either reading it out loud or just every time you look at the story, you might not need it at all. I'm always amazed at how many times I've spent hours working on like a paragraph or a transition and I just can't get it. But if I take those two lines out, I suddenly realize the story works just fine without it. Sometimes you're trying to fix something that doesn't need to be there at all. And I have All the Greatness in You by Tamika Fryer Brown here because it's a gorgeously beautiful book. And I've talked to Tamika and we have a lot of similar approaches to how we write our books. And again, reading to your cats is always a wonderful thing to do because they don't judge, at least not much. I mean, Hobbs on the right looks like he's judging a little. Number 9 is you want to delete stage directions. And when I say stage directions, it's like telling how people got where they are. And this would be an example. Goodbye, Harriet, said Grandma. She walked to the door, got in her car, backed down the driveway, and drove home. Later that night, and you don't always need to tell how someone got to where they are or what happened because page turns are great in picture books. It could just be, goodbye, Harriet, said Grandma. And then you turn the page and Grandma's wherever she went and doing whatever happens next. Some picture books, can cover a whole year just with just with page turns. My picture book, Sophie Squash, covers a whole year in Sophie's life. And picture books are great for season changes. I'm sorry, page turns are great for season changes. And then Viking in Love by Doug Chenko, which is like one of the funniest picture books I've read recently, does the same thing. It's a Viking in love with a woman he saw on a boat, and he's trying to like win her heart. And the page turns are just amazing. So also with stage directions, you want to say, what does your reader really need to know? And if they don't really need to know it to keep the story moving on, you can take it out. This is a corporate example, which sadly is very true. And I made this up because I'm not a tech or an IT person at all, but I would get copy from our technology area that said something like this. To reduce production time, we use new X357 software coded to match Ruby on Rails and brought in a V2 plugin for quality control and vetted it against our existing ISO 27001 security standards. If you don't work in IT, you have no idea what that means, and no one cares. So that's all stage direction. So you want to take that out and just say, making sure the new software worked properly with our existing systems and safeguards took our 8-person team more than 5 weeks. So you get the same message. We worked really hard, but you don't have all the stage directions or details that the previous one had. And sometimes people don't like that because, they're experts in what they do and they want to make sure everybody knows it, but you're not always writing for an expert like yourself. You're writing for the random person using the software who just wants to know that it works. Number 10 is looking at names in your story or your memo. Each character needs to earn their place into your book. Each person needs to earn their way into your article or memo. Who have you named? What do they add to the story? And what would be harmed if they weren't there? As I've moved on in my picture book journey, I've named a lot fewer people. In my picture book, Loretta's Gift, I name Loretta and I name her aunt and uncle and the baby. Loretta has 2 parents and they're just there and they do things, but I didn't give them specific names. And it's funny, I got a email from a grandma who had read this book to her grandson, and he was very concerned. Well, what were Loretta's mom and dad's names? And so I emailed the grandma back and I said, I didn't give them names and here's why, but if your grandson wants to name them, let me know. And so she emailed me back and said he wants to name them Bob and Marcia. I'm like, great. So in my head now they're Bob and Marcia, but that really didn't need to be in the book. Be Kind is written in the first person. So you're inside the head of the main character and he's trying to figure out how to be kind to his classmate, Tanisha. So Tanisha has a name, but the main character doesn't have a name because when you're thinking about yourself, you don't say, well, Pat, you're just thinking. And so some people have asked me, what's the main character's name? And they don't have one because I wanted the book to be written in a way where anybody reading it could think I'm that main character. And I'm having that same question about how can I be kind to somebody who needs it? So it didn't really matter in this case what the main character's name was. So as you're looking at your manuscript, trying to get words out of it, and you've done all the 10 things, there's some other things you can try. Sometimes you have to look at your manuscript in a different way because, you've looked at it and looked at it and looked at it, and you've lost perspective. So changing your font to a bigger size or your typeface to something different that you can still read, it kind of forces your brain to look at each word again versus just, skimming along and knowing what comes next. You can also look at each sentence on its own, like sentence by sentence. And if this is going to age me, but there was that game show called Name That Tune where people would say, I can name that tune in 5 notes. I can name that tune in 4 notes. So you want to look at each sentence and say, how could I write this sentence in fewer words, and give it a shot, and then put it together and see, does it still work? Another thing that seems weird, but actually like forces your brain to look at every individual word in what you've written, is to read your story backwards. So start at the end, start at the right side of the page, and go from right to left, from end to the beginning, like all the way back up to the top. And it makes no logical sense, but you look at each word and you can see things like, oh, I've used suddenly 8 times. Or you can see if you've, have a spelling error or made a mistake. And so it's just a fresh way to look at the story and really make sure it's as tight as it possibly can be. This is Corrine. She writes middle grade YA science fiction, and she sent me this, and I love it because I do the same thing. She says, I play arbitrary games when she's editing. I tell myself I have to cut at least 15, 25, or 30 words per page, which kind of goes back to that Richard Peck quote about you can cut 20 words from the tightest page you ever wrote. Or if she's got a paragraph and the last line of the paragraph only has 2 or 3 words, she tightens the paragraph until the words fit on the previous line. And that's one of my favorite things to do. I'm a nerd. Or if a section feels draggy and she can't pinpoint why, she goes back and cuts 3 paragraphs. So it's just another way of going through your story. You can look for words or phrases that are very common when people speak, but don't need to be written that way in your copy. In order to, you can just say to. In an effort to, you can just say to. Prior to can become before. At this point in time is now. Also, there's a lot of things where there's 2 words where the second word really adds nothing. Stood up, I just stood. Sat down, you just sat. Started to cry, cried. And so if you can go through and look for some of those, you can pick up a lot of extraneous words that way. Here's some more. As a result of, because, the majority of, most, looked down at the floor, looked down. I mean, what else is going to be there? Handed out, shared, on a daily basis, daily, located by, just by. And there's a ton more. So what I want to do now is I want to read Zombie in Love, which is one of my favorite all-time picture books by Kelly DiPuccio and Scott Campbell. And as I read it, I'm going to kind of talk through how it does some of the things that I've just shared. And I didn't see the story, obviously, because I didn't write it when it was in an early form, but I've seen this and I've talked to Kelly about it. And so I know a little bit about the process she went through. So this is Zombie in Love. Mortimer was lonely. Cupid's ball was just a few weeks away, and he didn't have a sweetheart. Oh, he tried, but somehow the ladies didn't appreciate Mortimer's affections. Okay, so first sentence, 3 words. Mortimer was lonely. So you don't have the backstory. You don't know why Mortimer's lonely. You don't know why he's a zombie. You don't know how he got here, but you just know the problem. Mortimer was lonely. You're jumping right in. There's your problem. And then a little bit more on the next page. Cupid's ball was just a few weeks away, and he didn't have a sweetheart. Oh, we tried, but the ladies didn't appreciate his affections. Okay. And then you jump right into Mortimer trying to solve this, again, without the backstory. It's obvious from the pictures that he's living with humans, which, again, you kind of wonder why, because that's not how it works on The Walking Dead. But he gave the girl at the bus stop a fancy box of chocolates. He gave the mail carrier a shiny red heart. And he gave the waitress at the diner a stunning diamond ring. So you have 3 sentences with 3 actions that Mortimer's taking to try and solve the problem. But if you look at the sentences, they show what Mortimer's doing, but they don't show the responses of the object of his affections. You can see it in the art. She's kind of like leaning away. She's like, oh, and, she doesn't look happy either. And then, of course, the rings on his severed finger, it was actually an actual human heart versus a heart. So none of that is stuff Kelly put in the story. It's all stuff that Scott Campbell put in the art. And then you've just got poor Mortimer, and he's been kicked to the curb. So 2 words that says it all didn't work out, rather than going into, but the waitress said this and the postal carrier said that. I mean, it's poor Mortimer. It didn't work. So then he tries again. He read books and followed all of the advice. He took his dog for a walk in the park. He worked out at the gym. He even took ballroom dancing lessons, but nothing he did seemed to impress the girls. And again, the art is showing him doing these typical things that you would find out in a dating advice manual, but in a very zombie-like way, and not realizing that's why it's not working. Then Mortimer got an idea. He placed an ad in the newspaper. Tall, dead, and handsome. If you like taking walks in the graveyard and falling down in the rain, if you're not into cooking, if you have half a brain, if you like waking up at midnight, horror films, and voodoo, then I'm the guy who you've looked for, and I'm dying to meet you. Saturday, Cupid's Ball, Punch Bowl, 7 p.m. So this is the page I like to show people when they say, oh, but if I cut my story, I'll lose my voice. I'll lose my sense of humor. No, you won't. This whole book is like 100 and some words. And Kelly DiPuccio put in a takeoff on the Margarita song, which, parents will appreciate and kids won't know. But, if you can do that, you don't have anything to worry about. Mortimer was sure this was the answer. On Saturday, he shopped for a new suit. He combed his hair and put on his best cologne. And again, he's doing these things in a zombie way. Cupid's ball was hopping. Couples were dancing and laughing and, well, having a ball. Mortimer took his place near the punch bowl and waited. And waited. And waited. And again, waited. The art shows it doesn't say, what happened or why it happened. It's just he's waited, and you can see him getting increasingly dejected. Each time a girl approached the table, Mortimer would smile like this. And each time the girl would shriek and run away. Now, again, this is one where people have asked me so much, well, did Kelly tell Scott what to draw for Mortimer smiled like this? So finally, I emailed Kelly and I said, did you tell Scott what to draw for the smile? And she said, nope. She said she thinks she had 2 illustration notes in the whole story, and that wasn't one of them. And any illustrator, who knows what they're doing is going to be able to come up with an awesome zombie smile that would, scare the human people away. He tried breath mints. He tried handing out roses. He tried being funny. Nothing worked. As the night wore on, the room began to empty. The punch bowl did not. And again, that's a perfect example of how you can be funny in 4 words. The punch bowl, 5 words. The punch bowl did not. Suddenly, it became clear to Mortimer that nobody was dying to meet him. He began to shuffle toward the exit when he heard a loud thud. The thud was followed by an even louder crash. Mortimer turned around. There, on the floor, was a girl. Her name was Mildred, and she was drop dead gorgeous. Okay, so there's an adjective there, drop dead gorgeous, but it's perfect for the story because Mildred is also a zombie. She smiled like this. So you've got the repetition. Mildred stood up and shook the pineapple rings from her hair. Am I too late? She asked. The clock struck midnight. You're right on time, said Mortimer. Mortimer and Mildred danced and held hands and dined by the moonlight. And again, they're doing these in a very zombie way. It was love at first bite. And then you've got his and hers. So lots of wordplay, lots of fun, lots of voice, very, very tightly written. A great example of, how you can write a wonderful story with not a ton of words. Okay, so here is another success story. And this one's from Deborah Underwood, who's one of my favorite picture book writers. She said, I had a picture book I'd given up on selling in book form, and a magazine editor was interested, but needed me to cut the text from 800 to 400 words. And even for, established writers, that's enough to make you go like, I thought it would be impossible, but I tried. After numerous passes, I managed to meet her goal without losing anything important. It was a tremendously valuable lesson for me. I'd suggest an impossible goal. Cut word count by half. You can always add words back, but you'll often find lots to trim. And again, save your original version. Consider it a writing exercise. If you hate it, you can go back to where you were. But I mean, if Deborah Underwood, who's amazing, thought her story was done at 800 words, but could still get it to 400, we can do the same. Remember, you can cut words without cutting important details. You can cut words without losing the tone, message, or heart of your story. And this is like one of the things I'm proudest of. I gave a version of this webinar a while back, and one of the attendees, Khalud Terapulsi, emailed me later and posted on social media. And she took her story, and this is like the actual photo. She used a scissors and she cut each sentence out. So she had all the individual sentences. And then she went through her story using the 10 tips that I had shared. And she went from 877 words to 423. And I never heard the resolution. I really hope it's sold. But it just shows what can be done if you open your mind to the fact that it's probably possible. And you want to cut the words people won't miss. You want to use the right words for what you've got left and have a good sense of balance. Like I said before, sometimes you could cut something, but you're going to make a conscious decision to leave it for the overall quality of your story. Also, I said before that, there's no one perfect length for a picture book. It's kind of like saying, how big should a dog be? And there are longer picture books that are long, but still don't have an extra word in them. These are three. Go Tell It by Cortez Harris and Gordon C. James. It's a nonfiction, how James Baldwin became a writer. It's beautiful writing, lyrical, lots of voice, long, but I think every word needs to be there. Library Lion is like my favorite classic book of all time. I would defy you to find an extra word in it. It's well over 1,000 words, and it's fiction. And then Shell Song, it's based on the author's true family story. Again, beautiful, longer than your typical picture book, but it doesn't seem long because every word, in my opinion, needs to be there. And I would recommend that you go to the library, put these on hold, check them out, take them home, look at them. These are some more traditionally length picture books that also just do a great job of telling the story without a lot of extra words. And some of them are older, some of them are newer, fiction, nonfiction. But it's great to see, what other people are doing and what's possible. More. Oh, and by the way, Amy Kroos Rosenthal, I wrote a whole blog post on Plant a Kiss because I can't remember the number of words in it, but like there might be 100, and it's perfection. Okay, and then motivational quotes because I like them. I leave out the parts people skip by crime novelist Elmore Leonard. I'm not a crime novel person. I've never read Elmore, but a story about him in the Atlantic said, over the years, he honed his spare dialogue-driven prose to a lethal leanness. And I love that. I want what I write to be lethally lean. And this is Tracy Sorrell, wonderful picture book writer, who also is a lawyer. And she said, I'm grateful for the editing I received in my undergraduate, graduate, and legal education. It helped my writing immensely. I think lawyers are also known for being wordy. Writing starts out solitary, but ultimately it's a collaborative process. The more trained eyes on a grants application, graduate thesis, legal code, brief, or book for children, the better. And I think that's something to remember if you're one of those people who quite naturally tends to get a little defensive. If people critique your story or suggest that maybe it could be shorter, you don't always have to do everything everyone suggests because not all feedback is equal and some might not be right, but I think you need to at least look at it. And if somebody says, I think you could do this shorter, assume the possibility that they're right, give it a try and, see where you end up. And it might be all the better for it. This is my all-time favorite book on writing. It's by William Zinsser. It's called On Writing Well. And it mostly talks about writing nonfiction, articles, memos, essays, but the tips apply so well to fiction writing as well. And it's one of those books, I was reading it on my couch and I was like laughing out loud and nodding because, after a whole career of editing other people's work and then writing my own, it's just so right. So and it's a fun read. It's not dry or boring. I just would suggest reading this. And he says, examine every word you put on paper. You'll find a surprising number that don't serve any purpose. This is my shameless self-promotion. I have a new picture book that came out in September. It's called One Can Be. It's the shortest picture book I've ever written. It's 130 words. And I made this little graphic. 96 of them are one syllable, 26 are two syllable, 7 are 3 or 4, and I have one 5-syllable word just because. 18 of those 130 words are the word one. And I'm very proud of this. It's a lyrical poem that is also a picture book, but those 130 words, it is the leanest thing I've ever written. It's about loving books and little free libraries and building a community through books. And I'm not sure, I mean, I'd like to think I could write something shorter, but right now 130 words is my the shortest one I've done so far. And I am happy to answer questions that anybody has about the 10 steps or how to use them or anything anyone might have.
Thank you so much, Pat. This was amazing. And I also love that the illustration part. I think when we're writing, because we don't see it yet, like we're writing and we forget how much the illustrations can actually say.
Yeah,
So I love that you put that in there because that the zombie book you read, which was hilarious, but the facial expressions and just all the little things in there, they brought it to life. And I think we often forget when we just look at this blank, well, black on white draft in front of us.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So thank you for that. Everyone, we have one question so far. Please we got about 5 minutes to answer questions. If you have them, please put them in the chat now. The question we do have from Janelle is, what was that website where you figure out how often a word appears in your story?
Okay, I'm going to give you two, but I have noticed that they change a lot. So I'm going to give you two and then tell you where to look if you can't find them. One is wordle.com, WORDLE.com. And the other one here, let me look up. I got to make sure I'm spelling it right. It's
Okay.
Tedexo. I don't want to lead you astray. Okay, so I just Googled word cloud on my phone, 2 words, word cloud, and a whole bunch. There's wordcloud.com. There's a free word cloud generator. There's an AI word cloud generator. Um, so if you do that, you're going to find lots of options. And then you just paste your document in, hit a button, and it will make you a chart. If you don't want to do that, you could also just print out your manuscript, grab your highlighters, and go through and start highlighting any word you've used more than once in the same color.
Okay. Or emotional support words.
Yeah, emotional support words.
Okay. Perfect. We're going to put that information into the course portal for everyone as well. Doesn't look like we have any other questions, which just shows how detailed you were, Pat. Thank you so much. This was absolutely amazing.
Awesome.
Thank
If you
you.
have a success, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I just said thank you for joining us, but go ahead.
I was just going to say, if you have a success story after using the tips, I'd love to hear about it. So, feel free to reach out in any of the ways because I always love hearing that someone, tried the tips and found them helpful. So thank you so much for joining me and listening.
Yes, absolutely. We'll put Pat's contact information that she's sharing here into the course portal as well, so you guys can share your success stories with her. And you'll see this recording in the course portal. And then also for our next event, just want to let you guys know about that. It's going to be a Q&A with Analia Cabello, who's an associate agent at Andrea Brown Literary Agency. And that's going to be on November 11th. And we hope to see you there. Thanks so much, everyone. Have a good rest of your day.
Thank you.
Bye.